You are now live.
Let me hit this thing.
Yeah, nope, they got it. That's
Too many cooks.
too many cooks here, but we got the little white notice off that we're live. And we are live, and this is Wednesday, April 20th, Senate Finance. I'm going to call us to order. We have Tom Cavett, who is our legislative economist, with us, and Tom is going to be, we're going to see his picture and his voice because of, surprise, surprise, spotty internet. So,
Hasn't been instant.
Tom, the question the committee has is, both the governor and the House pretty much gave back $50 million in tax credits in one form or another. This committee started out being a little unsure about doing that, something that permanent. Then we proceeded to do it. And I think we're just looking to check with you to see if, because things keep changing. We've had the Ukraine pop up. See if, you know, how secure you feel that we can give away, well, we're down now to only 35 to 36 million, but then we can give away about $35 million and not find ourselves hung out to dry in 3 years. Yeah. I think we're just looking to touch back with you. We know what the forecast said for 2 years, but I will turn it over to you.
Okay, well, the risk, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, the risks going out are very heightened. At the same time, the money we're seeing now is even stronger than we had anticipated. And there is an unwinding that occurs whenever you get kind of a boom period that takes a while. But I think recession risks are probably above 50% right now if you're going out 3 years, maybe even as high as 60% or so. And you know, just what the shape of it'll be and how it looks is uncertain. But there are many, many markets in which you know, prices are going up very rapidly, like housing, that are just unsustainable. And so, you know, when we're in this kind of a period, that it's not whether, but when there's going to be a correction. The most pressing and likely path right now is with a very high inflation, which I think is going to be very slow to moderate. We've been saying this for a while, but it was supercharged by the conflict in Ukraine. And I think that's getting baked in to the extent that if you're just focused on inflation, there's going to be a need for a much deeper slowdown in order to tame that. And that is how the Fed is talking right now. So, you know, enjoy it while you can, because this year and probably next year will be strong, even if there's a slowing. But after that, I think it's likely there'll be a correction. And you know, we don't have a revenue forecast to a level of precision to comment on a particular move like this, but we can talk about the risks. And typically what we do is, you know, raise taxes during a recession because we have revenue shortfalls, and then ease up in good times and not bank a lot. So that cycle may yet reappear, But I certainly can't say, based on what we're seeing now with revenues, there would be any problem in the current year. Quite the contrary.
Right, well, we are looking at tax credits, a $22 million child tax credit, and then upping the federal tax credit. I assume they probably sent these to you. I think the concern is that once you, and there's a Social Security expansion, which is growing, that the concern is once you give a tax credit, it is hard to walk it back in 3 years. The feds have been doing more limited grants, probably for similar reasons. And I think we've talked about the possibility of putting a 3-year sunset on one or all. And we've tried to go to some granting. I think the idea is that things are good right now, and we'd like to help out folks that aren't doing so well. But at the same time, not want to find ourselves having to cut the services those folks depend on 3 years out because we gave away our taxing capacity. So, you know, would you recommend in these kinds of times that we look towards something less permanent, or, you know, because we would have to look, I assume, to something like income tax in the future to raise revenues. And we're exempting a lot of retirees' income. So, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, this really gets as much into the political realm as economic, and I understand it. You know, it is difficult to take something away once given. So if it did have either a sunset or some kind of renewal provision, then it might be easier to adjust for any big swing in revenues. And you know, whereas the income tax is the largest revenue source, it's not the only one, but that is typically, you know, where we go when we have a short-term problem with revenue. So that's likely to be where it would occur. And of course, that's not optimal in the middle of a recession. So yeah, to the extent any spending or tax change like that has some flexibility in a time with a lot of uncertainty and high risk, that would be appropriate.
Okay. Any questions for Tom? Committee.
Is that what you think?
Thank you, very
Yeah,
helpful.
I think that was helpful.
Great.
You at least gave us a number to work around for the likelihood of a downturn. So thank you.
Okay.
I think. But okay. So thank you, Tom. Catherine, you and Graham are here still. Okay. And do we have a new and updated, or is Abby, I'm looking for a paper to work off of. I have the working paper we looked at yesterday. Do we have one?
I don't know if Abby sent in a draft yet, but I have basically somewhat updated the sheet that the committee has seen before. The proposals are still the same, but it just adds a little bit of context. I can refresh the committee's memory on that proposal that was last discussed on Friday, and then use that as a backdrop. And then add some context for the potential spending increases that are within that the committee discussed outside of the tax package, if that's helpful.
That would be helpful.
Okay, so
We've got Stephanie is on later.
Senator Cummings, I can request that Stephanie come anytime you want.
Okay, Stephanie has done some work on the kind of proposals we done with the 5.5 million, Senator Hardy.
Yeah, and I don't see her, but
No, we
Abby,
can
well,
have-
no, Abby's draft is not I don't think it's the current draft.
I
It's
don't-
5
well,
days old, so.
probably because we haven't talked to Abby.
Okay, I just wanted to
Yeah.
make sure people realize that.
Yeah, no, Abby's draft was, I think is from last Friday,
Yeah, it's the 15th, so that was Friday.
and
Things have changed.
I know Catherine was emailing with her. All right, come on.
I don't have another draft except the Friday version.
Yeah, no, there was, I think that's what we're gonna talk, there we go. To, so maybe we could see if Stephanie could come over. I know there was some discussion about wanting to help seniors. There's been suggestions that we put some money into AABD, which is aged, blind, and disabled. Apparently that it gets into our global commitment. And, but Graham, I think you had, I don't know if you or Stephanie had the numbers, that we could do like $10 a month. We actually did, the budget did an increase yesterday. The personal care allotment you get, yeah, that's $10, and they charge more than that for your TV in your room in most nursing homes. And this has been an ongoing problem that you can't afford to get your hair cut or, you know, buy new clothes or anything, or you do without a television, which is pretty hard when you're sitting there all alone. So, yeah. Stephanie will try and get to come over. And we were also questioning about what kind of levels we could look at and have the least, if any, impact on their SNAP, 3 meals, you know, that allocation. And so we've been doing numbers, and Abby has popped up. We are ahead of schedule.
So, Madam Chair, would it help to?
Join us.
Oh,
Okay.
Senator, would it help to just give the committee a reminder what it talked about on Friday, and then set the table for Stephanie here?
That would be helpful.
Okay. So I have a document on the committee's webpage. I'll share my screen just to remind the committee about what was discussed. So what the committee has discussed and what was sort of left on Friday was a tax package that was going to cost approximately $32 million. And that total package was $17.75 million less than the House's tax package. So you had $17.75 million in additional revenues compared to the House. The Senate Appropriations Committee, when it was building the budget, asked you all for $13.5 million better than the House. And so this proposal leaves $4.25 million in additional spending that was discussed in the committee on Friday. And the two areas that were discussed as uses for this $4.25 million were additional assistance to the Aged, Blind, and Disabled Program, AABD, and the Child Care Worker Compensation Enhancements or bonuses as a replacement for the Child Care Worker tax credit that was in the governor's package. And so I will let Stephanie talk about the potential for uses of that 4.25 that the committee was interested in. But just briefly, your all's discussions on Friday, as I understood it, included a child tax credit of $22.5 million that was relatively progressive and phased out quickly, with a higher base credit for individuals and families under $55,000 in adjusted gross income, and then phased out until there was no credit by $135,000. You all built on the governor's proposal for a child dependent care credit for a 100% of the federal credit proposal that'd be fully refundable. As a reminder, the governor's proposal was 65% of the federal credit, and that's your proposal would cost $5.35 million. You had a student loan interest deduction in your package that cost $2.2 million, slightly different than the governor's because you limited yours by income, which was $120,000 for single filers and $200,000 for married filers. You included the manufactured homes tax credit expansion, so that's $250,000 in the first year for fiscal year 23. And then you adopted the House's Social Security exemption language, which was an expansion of the existing thresholds for the Social Security exemption, the income threshold, I should say, by $5,000, so that there would be a full exemption for Social Security benefits for individuals with incomes below $50,000 and $65,000 for married filers, whereas the current thresholds are $45,000 for a single filer and $60,000 for a married filer. And then finally, to sort of make the retirement exemptions that you all passed in S53 be coherent with what you are doing on the Social Security exemption here, there's an expansion of those creations that you all put in for S53 by the same $5,000 that is in this House Social Security proposal. So in total, that package costs $32.02 million, and you essentially left the Appropriations Committee an additional $4.25 million for other spending priorities. And I think with that, I can take questions or turn it over to Stephanie.
And I think when we draft it, just for clarity, we will put those other two, the veterans and the civil service, just put those on this bill so we have all of the tax credits that I can remember in one place. Senator Sirotkin.
So what's left, Madam Chair, for a grab of S53 if we move
All
those
the corporate
pensions?
tax credits.
So yes, so S53 passed the Senate several weeks ago. It's been, the conference committee has not been called on that, but if your version of S53 included your corporate tax changes and your retirement exclusions. And so they are in both places right now. So if S53 in the negotiations in the conference committee removes those retirement exclusions, then they'll also be in H510. I think Abby can speak to sort of the legal sort of purpose of putting it in both places, but you're essentially making sure that the expansion of the income thresholds for Social Security are being reflected in your intent on the other retirement exclusions you passed in S53.
We'll just be negotiating them all in one place to have two different committees of conference, even though it's the same House and Senate committees. One negotiating one and others negotiating others. And our goal was to achieve equity, would be kind of counterproductive. So, and we'll have enough to do with the corporate income tax. So Stephanie.
Hello.
Hello.
So this committee's gonna make some appropriations.
Yes, we're gonna make appropriations.
I did not bring copies, but if you have access to a draft that I have sent to Faith.
If you have sent it to Faith, then
I did not post it, Stephanie. I didn't know if you wanted me to.
Would you post it? I'm sorry, we didn't coordinate very well on that.
And
or I can run down the hall and make copies.
No.
There's 3 documents I sent her. One is a draft of 2 sections that would make appropriations, and then just for reference, because you're talking about the AABD payment program, which is a state supplement to the federal SSI supplemental Social Security payment for very low income folks that receive Social Security. And so I'll as soon as state said they're posted.
Yes, soon as
folks
she,
can
soon as
access
she
them.
says that it generally takes a second to,
It will take a few.
yeah. So just walk us through it, just.
Okay, so one of the documents, just for reference, this is the, it's called the PL chart. It's the current federal poverty limit chart. And it shows you by monthly or annual income, what level of poverty a household would be at for a single person, a 2-person family, a 3-person family. And what we're talking about, to be eligible for SSI, you, as an individual, you need an income, an earned income, a monthly income of less than $861 a month. As a single person, and less than 1,280.
Sarah, we're really trying to keep just committee members in here.
I think it's 1,200, it's 1,280 something dollars a month.
Was it for a single?
Single is 861.
Is that the poverty level or the SSI level?
That's in order to be eligible for SSI, that's the income level cutoff, which turns out to be a little over $10,000 a year. So it's well below the 100% poverty level for a single person, which is $13,500.
And that's without the supplement?
And that's without the current roughly $52 a month.
How much is that?
Right now, it's currently about $52 a month for a single person. So you're talking about people that are in that under 100% of poverty, and anything that you're talking about is not likely to push people over 100% of poverty in terms of the scale. And then the other sheet is the sheet that the agency puts out every year, which will show you both the SSI amount and the ABD amount by category. So there's about 15,500 people that get the AABD payment, and 2/3 of them live in independent settings. They get roughly that $52 a month. The other third live in either res care or nursing home or other settings, and that their AABD supplement, how much of that they can keep is under the personal needs allowance limit. Otherwise, their income goes to the institution that's providing the care for them. So within that total population, it's 2/3 independent, either living alone or living in a household.
Did we raise the personal needs allowance in this budget?
We did a little bit. It's very, very tiny in the budget that you just passed. It was the $63,000 general fund, $143,000 total. Very modest increase, and it was only for the personal needs allowance folk, which it's tiny. It's like $250 a month.
So does that mean that caregivers, res care and stuff like that actually see a decrease in their?
No, but that's what we're offsetting. We're saying you, the individual, get to keep a few dollars more, and what we're paying for is the offset, because the institutions don't get to keep that, don't get to take that money.
So replacing it.
Yeah.
And you, when you were saying that people are still going to be under 100% of poverty, that's why we know that we're not risking your TANF or any of those other kinds of.
So it's very unlikely that you may have a tiny bit of SNAP if you're near the 100% poverty at all. I'm just having trouble seeing how much, if anything, really would impact SNAP. This is not a crowd that has a lot of kids necessarily. What I have to say, I'm not perfectly clear on is, if they have a housing voucher, does that count? Does that push them over? That's where people in that total calculation of those benefits, where you might have an increase in the AABD supplement, where it would have a modest increase, decrease in your SNAP benefit.
But they wouldn't likely will lose, they maybe just not benefit. And certainly the great majority would benefit. Is that kind of what?
That's what that's why I'm thinking, that you may, unless I'm missing something in the total calculation of income for these folks, it may not have a very significant impact on SNAP at all, if any.
That's satisfactory.
So you have some figures for us?
So I was.
$10 raise.
Well,
$2 million.
yeah, it's actually in the $10 range. So I was told that you had 4.25 million to spend. And so this is the third sheet that is just the draft of two sections that you would, two appropriation sections that.
That is posted.
The first is an AABD construct, aid to the blind and disabled. That would take 750 of your 4.25, and you would be, should back up a little bit. The benefit is paid for as a global commitment waiver investment. It is not a straight general fund expenditure in the budget. And so that means it's matched up. You could take 750, match it up, and turn it into $1.7 million. And that would give you roughly a little under $10 a month increase on average on your AABD payment. 110, 109, 110 a year increase. That's what it would provide at 1.7. It is an investment in the global commitment waiver that is a very tight cap on the level of room we have. If you were doing something like $25 a month or something like that, you'd be at 4.6. You would probably be really pushing the limits on room in the waiver arena. So that's a consideration. And so I simply, took 3.5 and 750 to see what it could turn out to be. And then I have put in a section C here because we need you leave it to the agency to calculate the exact percentage increase that they would calculate, and then increase the personal needs allowance for the third of people that are living in residential settings, so that the increase that you're giving accrues to the individual as opposed to the facility that they're in, if that's your desire. The DCF is still checking on one thing. There's no cost, there's no admin cost to increasing the benefit. It's a per check. The federal government actually does the processing because it rides on top of the SSI. And we pay them per check. But they are checking under the waiver whether or not for the 2/3 of people that are independent setting, if any investment requirements under the waiver. They'll let us know. I think it's relatively low probability that we would be. So that gives you the sort of the picture of what 750 of your $4.25 million could turn into as a investment, if that was the level that you wanted to support an increase in AABD.
And going any higher, you're worried it might hit us, get it to.
Yes, I'm pretty sure that we'll hear from AHS that they don't support it under the investment cap.
Already at this level.
Probably, although it's less, there's always things moving year in, year out, and a portion of our 8% increase has been under that cap. We're also getting an update on Friday on the status of the waiver, because we're in an extension period we haven't finalized, but for the past 5 years they have been tightening down on the investment cap room under the waiver. So that's the balancing out there. Occasionally we find things that are in the investment area that we can cover in other ways, in terms of room in and out. It's just there's a fairly long list of things that are under that investment category. And this is one. This is not one that we can some costs that we have moved on to, like the SUV waiver, that were formerly an investment. Finding other sources for, I don't think is likely for this underlying program or this expansion of the program.
Do you have any history of how often this supplement has been raised over the last 40 years?
I don't think it has been. I can go look at our 5-year, but it's been a long time. It's been.
I remember dealing with 40 years ago, it was like $35 or something.
The move to 52 was probably about 4 years ago, and it wasn't a big move, I don't think.
35 is what it was called, general assistance, and it was just enough to keep you from not starving and embarrassing us dying on the street. I mean, it just, and yeah, I mean, it's, and this is the one where if you're in a facility, they get paid $58 a day, which is pretty hard to find a room with meals for $58 a day. So,
For Medicaid.
yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
okay.
And then the second amendment that's on this draft sheet is an amendment that's fairly straightforward. It's taking the remaining 3.5 million of general fund capacity that you have left in your package and appropriating that to DCF as an extension of the $6 million ARPA funded child care worker retention program that was set up in the budget adjustment. And it's not, that program is not actually fully stood up yet. Because that was ARPA dollars, it has to be through the guidehouse. And so they are developing, just like with the $60 million healthcare retention and designated agency retention program. They're in the process of standing up that program. But since that's a grant for childcare worker retention, this as drafted assumes that you would want to use that same sort of structure that you're creating right now to push out this $3.5 million.
Is there any more detail on what the BBA language says as to what the retention program looks like?
It's in section 68 of the BAA. It's actually to the child care providers. It gives a lot of flexibility to the providers to use for retention. So the provider, whether it's a home care provider or a child care center, would come and seek the grant and demonstrate to the agency how they are using that grant to retain their workers. I assume that most of them will be higher pay or bonus payments or payments directly to the workers, but we haven't actually, opened the gates on it yet. So
if we just go back to the ABD for a second, because I love the match, and 750,000 in the scheme of the global commitment thing must be bug dust.
So the match is the 1 point. So what counts under the total investment cap is the $1.7 million.
So where are we? Is it like hundreds of millions of dollars?
So the global commitment waiver itself is like 1.7, 1.8 billion, but the cap for investments, the highest it ever was 120, and now I think it's down in like 105. I have to go look at it, 105 or 7 or something like that.
This is a separate carve out, or
It's a separate carve out. It's a separate. These are the things we get to pay for with federal match that we would not otherwise be able to pay for with federal match absent our waiver.
Yeah. This has been a theme in health and welfare, is that we're up against the cap. And I actually didn't realize these payments were under global commitment until today.
So, and they're under that very sub cap of the investments. So they're not, we are concerned about the room in the waiver in the negotiations for our regular, ordinary Medicaid expenditures and what that trend line will look like so that we can live within that trend line over the next 5 years for what needs to be growth in regular base Medicaid expenditures. This particular piece has to fit under the investment cap or has to be turned into 100% general fund.
It sounds though, like you're saying, between the update from CMS and DCF's analysis, before this were to land on the governor's desk, we would have maybe better confidence that
we might have a better picture and understanding of where that trend might be headed in the negotiation.
Okay.
If you're talking about something that's $5 or $6 million, it's a lot harder to justify how it might in the tight cap.
Any other questions for Stephanie?
yes, on the child care worker retention grant, was the BAA and this 3.5 million viewed as one-time monies?
So the ARPA money is in BAA and that is one-time money. This, we can add a phrase to, just like I have it at the bottom of sub A above, you can add a phrase like that to an intent to incorporate it into the base budget. There's lots of changes in terms of the structure of childcare payments that are going on, so you might want to incorporate it in and you know, maybe the form of it changes as that reform and system change becomes more clear. But even if you put intent language in, there's no guarantee that a future administration out of the gate, when they propose the budget, would not, you know, it might say, that's great, you did that for your intent, but my intent in giving you this new budget is different for this 3.5. But you can make your intent clear here, that you want it incorporated into the base budget.
Yeah, my understanding was that the child worker retention was more of a one-time.
It definitely was in the BAA.
Yeah, as we moved along towards this whole rewrite.
Right.
But anything we do with AABD, you're not gonna give them $10 a month and then take it back. I mean.
But you could also, I mean, you could make it clear that you want to build this $3.5 million into the base of the child care development budget, whether or not the form of the 3.5 million remains the same over time.
And there is some logic to doing that, because again, as I've said, that next year we'll get the child care financing study that will make recommendations for the sort of big picture financing of child care programs, and having that in the base would give us the flexibility to move it around once we know what that program might.
Okay. So we could add that same phrase.
So I thought we were discussing going in the opposite direction in terms of some of this funding of tax credits in here, having the advantage of it being one time, and especially with the fact that this whole new paradigm is coming, we don't know what the level should be and why are we adding it to the base this year until we know the full paradigm. It's sort of like.
We definitely talked about the payment to childcare workers as a one-time expenditure as opposed to a tax credit, which was ongoing. So to bend it into the base, you might as well give them a tax credit. But the AABD, yeah, that's ongoing. And
So you like the language that's here, then, Madam Chair?
I
It's
like
intent of the General Assembly for the BABD
to be,
thereafter.
yeah. That isn't that much, and that, if I gotta build into a base, I think, I mean, they're looking at the same, yeah. Okay, any other questions for Stephanie?
And I think I'm not a drafter, so I think the references Abby will probably have to, especially in the childcare, just I think you should say action results.
Yeah. Once we get this, once
She'll
we
fix it,
decide what
yada,
we're gonna do. I'm gonna do our one next witness if we have no more questions for Stephanie. I got an email from Addie Stromolo in the Department of Health Access, and I had Faith forward it to you and Addie. There.
Madam Chair, could I just ask you a question before we hear from Addie? Is it fair to be sure that Abby can be working on this?
I'm hoping that Abby is working on it. I think she drafted the basis for everything that's on this sheet.
And that includes a, what, 3-year sunset or something?
Not yet.
Okay.
That's been discussed, but that's our next discussion is what's everyone feeling after hearing Tom's assessment. Abby, are you okay at this point?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I can start drafting that given your direction.
Yeah, well, we just want to pull those, just cut and paste those two things from 53 on. Something like Stephanie's language get added on. And so Addie, you think there might be some trouble with Medicaid and the child tax credit? So talk to us.
Sure. Thank you. This is Addie Strumlow, Deputy Commissioner at the Department of Vermont Health Access. Yeah, so this is in the context of H510, the child tax credit. And I don't think it's trouble. I think it's just kind of minor technical kind of confirmation that we wanted to raise because we were kind of late to the conversation about the tax credit program in that bill. And our understanding is that there was an intent not to have it impact benefits, including Medicaid. And we had a couple suggestions about how to clarify that that's the case, if it is in fact the case.
Okay.
And I can walk through those, but I think they're largely technical in nature and just, it's more kind of assurances to the department that we can, in fact, disregard these payments when we're processing eligibility for Medicaid.
Okay, so you did send us some technical language, and what that language will do is reassure the feds that you can separate out this tax credit money for the sake of determining eligibility for Medicaid. And I assume that would also mean Dr. Dinosaur, because I don't think the tax credit would be particularly valuable if your kids lost their health insurance. And so I'm quite sure that wasn't our intent. But you think that this is doable with these technical changes?
Yeah, just minor technical changes. And then I think I want there to be some awareness that if it passes this way, we do have to go through a federal process. We think it's going to be fairly routine, but we have to get permission through our state plan to disregard these payments as assets from the MABD program, so Age Blind Disabled Medicaid program. But that can certainly be done in the timeline allowed in the current draft. So shouldn't be a big deal, but we wanted there to be awareness of that. And then the last thing is that we just need some confirmation that the for purposes of income-based Medicaid that's based on taxable income, that these payments meet the standards of the general welfare doctrine, which I know very little about and would totally defer to tax colleagues, but that's kind of the standard that it has to meet so that we can disregard those payments.
Okay, we'll have to deal with that. We aren't just doing the child tax credit, we're doing the federal child independency tax credit, where if we do a refundable tax credit, the state's portion or addition to the child independent care, is that likely to combine? I mean, there's a couple areas here where you could get some double payments if you have a, number of kids. Because the child tax credit is only preschool, but then the other one is older. I think I heard one of them's up to, that was EITC, was up to 16, but are those, and if we went to EITC, which it's my understanding doesn't impact benefits, would that be a safer way to go?
From DIVA's perspective, we just need them. We need whatever tax credits and advance payments and refundable payments are available to meet these two standards so that we can disregard them.
Okay. So we'll work on, it's probably something for our attorney. Okay, questions for Addie? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That was a lot easier than I thought it might be. All right, committee, we've heard Tom Cavett, 50-50 to 60% likelihood that we're going to see some correction. No one can ever predict how deep within the next 3 years. And so that leaves us with the question we started with, do we want to give away all of, I mean, if you do a tax credit, it's pretty much in perpetuity unless you don't do it that way. So Senator
Yeah,
Peterson.
I mean, this is, the 32, does that include the 4.25 or not?
Does not.
Does not. So it's actually $28 million crudely of tax expenditures, right?
No, it's
No,
32.
the other way, I'm sorry, it's 32.
Yeah.
So it's 32 down from 48 as it came to us. You know, and I think in many sense, this money will go back right into the economy. I mean, these are not boosting families that are stashing away their millions. So I don't know. I feel like we haven't cut it in half, but we've certainly trimmed back in a significant way. I don't know. To me, that's and we're talking about a sunset, Madam Chair. I don't know.
Well, that's what are we talking about a sunset? Right now, we don't have a sunset. So it would be easier to put a sunset on now so people know I've got this extra money coming from 3 years, but don't go out and put a mortgage on it based on surety it's gonna come in.
Yeah, I think Tom said 3 years. So, I mean, I think, you know, and he doesn't have a crystal ball.
No, nobody does.
Nobody does, but I think
it crashed tomorrow.
Right. It makes sense for the child tax credit, since it's new especially. I think a 3-year sunset makes sense, or 2 years if that would make you feel more comfortable, Madam Chair. And then I also think the child and dependent care credit, as Graham has pointed out to us a couple times, this is an existing thing that we're making a lot more generous.
Right.
So we could make a 2-3 year sunset that just goes back to current law. So it wouldn't like eliminate it, it would just go back to what we have right now, which is still a credit, it's just less generous.
Okay, student loans, manufacturing.
I feel the same way on the loan interest deduction.
Yeah, that
I
one's.
think the other three, I don't think you really can change. I mean, certainly 5 and 6 you can't sunset, because they're people's monthly incomes.
Right.
Okay, so we're gonna sunset in 3 years the child tax credit, child and dependent care sunset to current law, which it would anyway.
Yeah.
In what, 2, 3?
We talked about.
Why don't we do the loan first?
I would be happy with, yeah.
Do them all in or, yeah.
And student loans, same
Yeah,
thing.
I think so. I mean, there's a federal student loan one, right? That one.
Yeah, well, it would revert to current law.
I'm not adding things up the same way here. What am I missing? So,
That you gotta talk to Graham about.
okay, Graham's still here. So we start out with, what's the number, 49 million? And how much of that 49 million are we?
No,
He has a sheet.
I'm looking at it, it's just not adding.
we didn't start at 49.
Okay.
We start, the
Started at 36.
appropriations spent 13 of it.
Oh. okay.
So we started at 35 point something, yeah, close to 36.
Oh, I see. So the 32 gives us the 4.2. That's all.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which we're doing as an appropriation.
Can I ask Graham a question? Sure. Graham, can you just remind me really quickly, without getting into the weeds, the manufactured homes tax credit? It was a long time ago when we went over this. Does it increase each year because it sort of compounds in some way? Am I remembering that right?
You are remembering that right. So the way these credits work are they are 5-year credits. So basically, if you think about, let's say fiscal year 22's credits, basically I think it's VHFA or I can't remember who exactly administers this program, but basically in 22, they'll issue the credits and they have a 5-year tail. So, fiscal year 22's credits will be X amount in fiscal year 22, and then certain amount in fiscal year 23, fiscal year 24, 25, 26, 27. And then next year's credits are 5 years as well. But then, so you have this stacking effect basically of each year's credits. And so if you're increasing the credit by $250 this year, then the impact of the policy is $250,000 next year, because you have the increase of this year's credits plus the increase in next year's credits. But the 5-year tail from this first year is going to go out 5 years. So eventually this expansion by fiscal year 27 will be a total cost relative to current law of 1.25 million, and then that amount ongoing.
Right, so it ramps up, then ramps down.
It doesn't ramp down, it stays at 1.25.
It's 1.25 million, and that, I guess, is ongoing.
It's ongoing, yes, it's an ongoing reduction in revenue.
And that's in 159, that's in the economic development bill, right? Or is that, Mike, or did they take it out?
I think it's in the budget.
No, my understanding is that this was taken out of 159, and there was intention to put it on a tax bill, but it was not put on any. This is where it has landed. It is also in H437 that is on the wall in this committee, but it is not in the budget. It is not in H159 right now. So this is the only place aside from H437 that the manufactured homes tax credit.
And that went on 159, that left us with the property transfer tax hanging out there and the machinery and equipment. 437 was pretty much gutted and sparse when it started.
And this is why we wanted to put it on this bill, Michael.
I think we decided that we're gonna put it at 510.
Yeah.
Okay. Graham, Social Security, can you give us, I've got 1.67 now. But does that include the other 2 programs? Will we add them all together? I'm just wondering, what's that gonna look like 3 years? Yeah, I saw that. You have to, in the out years. Because everybody, they're all gonna be aging. And I'm just, what, 3 years out, what's that Social Security commitment likely to look like?
So our prediction is that Social Security exemption will cost close to $2 million by fiscal year 25. And so with respect to retirees on Social Security in this package that's being discussed, you have 1.67 million in fiscal year 23, plus you are boosting AABD by $1.7 million, so 750 from state funds and another 950 from federal funds. And so the total amount that you're contributing to seniors in this bill is approximately $3.4 million, about half in tax credits, or not tax credits, tax deductions, and another half from boosting AABD.
Okay. AABD is actually a pretty good deal if we get the federal match.
But it's not just seniors, it's a lot of people.
There are a lot, yeah. On AABD is a lot of wounded warriors, disabled, developmental.
People on ABD generally don't have a work history.
No,
No, it's
they're disabled.
that's why
Yeah.
they can't
They
work,
can't.
that's often
They don't get
the nature of their
Tax.
disability.
But we just do enough to keep them from dying on the street. I mean, I'm not even sure we're doing that. I mean, I can remember talking about general assistance when it was $35, and that wasn't very long ago.
So
The one-
Our largesse
the one-
was the
the
ice
one-
wall.
countervailing feature on Social Security. It's true that we're an aging population and the number's going up to 2 million in 3 years or something like that. But the exemption that we're putting on stays flat, even though the Social Security
Right.
benefits go up for a COLA every year.
Yeah.
We're not increasing the exemption, so that has some governing effect.
Right, and the social, or the thing we did for the federal
They're all the same.
the employees, this federal pension
Yeah.
employees, that will go down, because
It's
They're they're
there's
switching
fewer and
over to
fewer.
social.
fewer and fewer
Civil
as
service ones.
they,
Yeah.
literally as they die.
Well,
there
The
are
newer ones are on social
Exactly,
security,
exactly.
and the newer
Right, so
veterans
they get
also
picked up.
have, yeah, they'll get picked up in social
The other
security.
issue is the social security benefit in here is very, very modest.
The increase.
Yeah.
Very modest compared to what our surrounding states are doing.
Yes, Randy, and we can't develop 59% of the land mass in this state, and we don't have the tax base, we can't do it. Or we
But
should cut
overall-
A&E again.
Overall, this package helps working families
Yeah.
through child tax credits, child and dependent care credits, student loan interest. The manufactured homes is for modest sized homes. Social Security is for senior citizens. I mean, this tax package helps a lot of people
It-
across the
it
board.
does.
That is one of the things that I know was your priority and the governor's priority. And we have done it with this package.
Meet me in the middle.
And let me tell you, I got asked at Money Chairs what we were doing. It's going to be a very painful committee conference.
It's gonna be fun, Madam Chair.
Yeah, right.
Lots of fun, except that the chair is down with COVID, and so we're probably not gonna be able to have committee conference until she's back, which will probably be next.
And is it that the other body is principally focused on the exclusivity of the child tax?
They like their tax credit.
Killer.
So, but we haven't voted on anything, so let me see if I'm clear as to where we are. We are doing $32.02 million in tax credits, plus 4.2 in appropriations. And we are doing the child tax credit with a sunset of 3 years. The child and dependent care, we're going to 100% of the federal credit, and it's fully refundable. And that is the sunset, it'll sunset to current law anyway. Student loan interest, we're raising, it's limited by income, but we're raising the amount you can deduct, right? To 120 for singles and 120,000. I mean, what's 1,000 or a few decimal points, and 200 for married. And that we're gonna sunset manufactured home tax credits. We are not sunsetting. So they're an ongoing 1.25. Some days,
Isn't that a
some,
5-year thing, or? I
No.
know
The
it's-
silver credit is 5-year credits, so.
But you
it's
keep
fine.
selling
On year 6, it keeps going.
Yeah, but it stays
you
flat.
keep selling.
Graham, in the first year, in terms of the budget, do you have to budget 1.25
No,
or just
no.
250?
No, you only have to book 250.
But we are committing, by the time we get 3 years out, we're bumping that, and it's a 1.25 ongoing expense unless we sunset it.
Well, Madam Chair, one thing we talked about, I think this is it, because we've talked about this many times, is making it a 3-year one so that it rolls for 3 years and then stays.
I don't know if that would,
Was that an option, Graham, or am I mixing this up with something else?
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Doing it as a 3-year credit instead of a 5-year credit?
I'm not aware of any proposal that has done
Okay.
something like that.
I think that was something else.
sunset.
The thing is, we know the total cost, it doesn't grow. it reaches a maximum of 1.25, and then the next year it's 1.25, and the year after that's 1.25, and it's forever
Yeah.
1.25.
Until we
So
get asked
it
to raise.
grows a little bit, but then it caps.
Okay.
Is that diminishing the tax credit of the second, third story in town stuff?
No.
No, that's
nothing to do with
downtown
this.
tax credits, that's not in here at all. This is the ability to buy or upgrade your mobile home.
Correct.
You're double wide, single wide. Personally, I think we should be buying the stick built, but that's my bias. I know it's the three little kids, but I am moderate. We cannot afford a brick house like that. Inside joke. All right, and we're doing the Social Security, we're upping the income thresholds. Full exemption for 50,000 for single filers, 65 for married filers, and then it phases out over the next 10,000. So we're just upping everything 5,000. So you will wait. So the end place you will do 60. You'll phase out at 60 for singles and 75 for married filing jointly. Okay.
That's correct.
And if my income is 76, I don't get anything?
That's correct.
I'll talk to you about that next year.
I want to make sure I understood that. Could you repeat that?
So for the Vermont Social Security exemption, if this were to be passed and enacted, if you were a married filer, you would get a full exemption of your Social Security from Vermont taxes at $65,000 and below. And then over the next $10,000, that exemption phases out such that by $76,000, as Madam Chair said, there would be no exemption. I should note, however, that these individuals and married filers would still benefit from the federal exemption that flows through to us, and that exemption is at least 15% of Social Security benefits. So there is the federal one still there, but we're talking about the Vermont portion, the Vermont exemption that is phased out to zero by $76,000.
And it's the construct we passed a few years ago. We're just making
Yes,
it
we're just raising
$5,000.
the level. Okay, and we're making whatever adjustments we need to make to all the other ones, so that equity, which is what we started out trying to do, is where we are. And then we are allocating 4.2, I believe it was it 1.5? I haven't got Stephanie's in front of me. It was 3.5 for the plug-in at, I believe, one time for the payment to child care workers, and then we were doing the AABD
750 plus match.
plus match.
Yep.
Okay?
Yep.
And we need to put in whatever technical language Addie sent out to make sure that all of this complies. And Abby, can you come live?
Yes, I'm lurking.
All right, do you understand what we're doing?
For the recommended technical changes from DEVA, yes, absolutely. Those I can make. I was just looking at the language for the appropriations, and I'll make sure that's edited. And I'm just adding in possibly some statutory citations and just changing the format slightly, because we do draft a little differently than when it's for the budget. As for, would you like me to walk through my sort of outstanding questions list? Would that be helpful?
Please.
Okay.
Yes, that would probably be very helpful.
Excellent. I understand that you want to do perhaps one or more sunsets to
One
the.
is sunset, everything except Social Security. I think everything except Social Security and the manufactured homes.
All the tax credits.
All the tax credits.
Okay, so the child tax credit, the child and dependent care tax credit, would, in your words, revert to what's under current law? You wouldn't repeal it altogether?
Oh, and the student loan.
And the student loan
back to
deduction,
current law.
interest deduction?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now you have to
So
leave at
just,
4:30?
I believe it's 4.
You have to leave at 4, you're late.
I know.
Okay,
I'm so fascinated by this discussion though that I.
So
can't
just-
look at it.
You can't wait to vote for it, right, Randy?
Well, I do have just one question,
Yeah.
just for clarification, to go back over the child tax credit and the dealing with single versus married, if any.
there isn't any.
That's, I assumed as much,
Yeah.
but I wanted to make that to be entirely clear on
Yeah.
that the 135 phase out is based on the taxpayer's tax return, and if they're filing jointly and for one particular child, that's the limit. If they're filing singly for one particular child, and someone can't file separately and claim the same child.
Okay,
I mean,
yeah,
that's my understanding.
that would be
Yes.
my understanding, yeah.
yeah, so as in this draft and also what came over from the House, there is only one income limit irrespective of filing status. So whether that's a single filer or married filing jointly, there's one income threshold. And under federal child tax credit law, which this piggybacks off of, only one individual can claim a child. You couldn't have more than one taxpayer claiming the same child as their dependent for the credit.
Thank you. Are you planning, Madam Chair, to vote on this today?
Well, I'm getting caught because Senator Pearson isn't here the next 2 days and you need to leave now. And Abby needs to leave at 4:30?
5 o'clock, Madam Chair.
5 o'clock.
I can
All
come
right.
back after 5:30 if you need me to.
I don't know, we will see a completed draft.
Well, that's
This
why
would be
I'm
changed.
trying to get it so we can get it to draft. We can fight over the salt arrangement.
Do we know where Bray is?
Well, we don't have a draft to vote
I
on.
understand.
Could we vote on hold it open for you till tomorrow?
We can do that.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay,
Unless you're willing to stay longer.
Unfortunately, I can't. I want to get my car repaired.
yeah, and I'm not going to ask you to try zooming in the car and voting.
It's another
Which
accident,
probably-
2 days in a row. It's
Given the timing, it's not a good idea. Okay, yeah, or we could all get together like at 8:45 in the morning
Yes.
and
If I
vote.
can meet by Zoom, I
And
can,
we
No
could-
car until 9.
Oh.
Yeah.
I can hop on by Zoom.
Are you allowed to vote?
Yes, the rules allow that.
I think,
in
yes, you
committee.
can vote in committee.
I wouldn't have a big window tomorrow afternoon, but I would have a window, but I also, I'd rather see this move than you accommodate my schedule, so.
Yeah.
Well, if you make it, well, I guess.
No,
I
it's
won't
not
I
gonna
won't
make it home by 5
until,
o'clock.
yeah, I won't be there by 5 o'clock.
Okay, so what we will plan to do is do this first thing tomorrow. If you can zoom in at what time can you zoom in?
I'll be on a train, so it should be presumably, as long as that works, that'll be fine. So I don't know how
Brother-in-law
long
says
for
it's
is.
fine.
Well, I'm sure it is fine, but look,
Okay.
all we can do is try.
We will
I'm not
try.
entitled to
All
this.
right,
This
so
is-
you
this
zoom
is
in at 1:30 tomorrow. And we'll.
early night then.
We're on the floor at 1 now.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. Drive safely.
All right. We'll have Faith send you a note when we're,
What, we could, if Randy's gonna be home by 5:30, we could do it at 5:30.
He's gotta go to get some,
Okay, all
he's
right.
getting his car.
it's far away.
Yeah.
He lives in Canada.
Up above Swan.
And is Bray around?
You want me to go get him?
Probably work with legislative council here.
Yeah.
All sorts of bills to fight over.
No, we'll bring him in. He was there last night. We'll bring him in when we get this draft. There's nothing new in this. We're just doing wording. So, Abby, do we need to put any technical language in with the child tax credit? There was questions about SNAP. commissioner said, or 3 squares, it was. If they got it all at once, it could impact them one day.
It was better to have it all once, I thought.
Yeah, it was better, and he said he would apply. I guess we could just take him at his, for a waiver. So I guess we can just take him at his word.
But we did design it to be once and not
Yes.
aim for twice,
Yes.
right?
We did.
That is
Okay, so Abby, can you walk us through what you've got, and then we can get it to the editors and. we'll
Yes,
see.
for the record, Abby Shepherd, Office of Legislative Counsel, the draft that is under my name on the committee web page is a reflection of your discussion last Friday. So there will be a fair amount of new language just to, so you're not alarmed when I draft the sunsets. Those do take, because there is current law that you want to revert to, I will have to draft language reenacting some of that language. So it will be a bit lengthy and hopefully won't be too confusing. But the language under my name that's draft 2.1, I can walk you through that. I'll share my screen if that's helpful.
And on all of these, you will add the sunset.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly.
But doing that is tricky, I see.
Yeah.
It just, so for the child tax credit, because it's, you're just repealing it wholesale, that's an easy draft. It'll just say this section is repealed, and then I'll do cleanup in the statutory purposes. However, the child and dependent care credit, because you want to revert back to what existing law is, I'll have to add back in language to reflect that again in statute. I'm just
What
trying
if we just exempt, oh, if it sunsets, then we've already replaced what's there, right?
Exactly. Because it will be 3 years later.
Yeah.
Statute will already have been in effect for 3 years. It will go back to what the statute said prior to 2022.
Okay.
So this is draft 2.1, and this has the language creating a Vermont child tax credit. It's a refundable credit of $1,000 per qualifying child, following federal definitions. However, the age is 5 years or younger at the close of the calendar year. It does allow for part-year residents to take the credit, but it's prorated based on their Vermont income. It changes the phase-out amounts compared to the as-passed House version, so that for every $10,000 of adjusted gross income above the threshold, the credit is reduced by $125 per child. And the AGI income thresholds are also changed here from the House version. So it's $55,000 of AGI. And again, as was just discussed, it's irrespective of the filing status. So it's the same threshold for a single filer or a joint filer. Subsection C is what Deputy Commissioner of DEVA was just pointing out. There could be 2 small changes made here, and I can make those changes in the next draft. They are both on line 15. One is a reference to these chapters in Title 33, different benefit and assistance programs. The recommendation was to include Medicaid, so that would also have a reference to Chapter 19 of Title 33. The recommendation is also to remove that final clause on line 15 for a period of 12 months from receipt. That would exclude the child tax credit for any period of time. The for a period of 12 months from receipt was taken from US statute that creates a similar exclusion for federal tax credits. And that is a bit of a policy decision, but it does seem to have an impact on the Medicaid programs that she was pointing out earlier.
Okay.
So that would broaden it and would that way it would not impact Medicaid.
Okay, before we go further, we talked on Friday about putting a short form in for people who would, and I got a call from the tax commissioner who was very concerned about that. at which point I was distracted by other things the committee was doing. But what have we put in? I suppose we could just leave it here and deal with it in conference.
I would defer to the commissioner as to his concerns about this language, but the new language starts on line 19 here. It's a new subsection D. And it states that an individual who is otherwise eligible for the credit but is not required to file a tax return may claim the credit in the form or manner as determined by the Commissioner of Taxes. So it gives the commissioner discretion.
Driving seat, so yeah.
But it does say it must be.
What page are we on?
That starts on page 2 at the very bottom lines. It starts on line 19 and it continues on to page 3.
He was concerned about some kind of separate portal or forum that would be more open to the possibility of fraud or cheating.
Yeah, well, we can deal, if we can hold on this. This is one of those fine details we can do in conference. It's in there, so we can change it.
The only question I have, I'll follow your lead, Madam Chair, but the House put it in there already. In fact, they made it more complicated. Or is this just the House's language, Abby?
No, this is new language based on your discussion Friday. This subsection D is new.
The House had directed a portal or something?
Nope, the House, the as introduced language and the House passed language was silent as to how the credit had to be claimed. So there was no direction to create a portal.
And so would we understand the House's language to extend eligibility to somebody who doesn't file?
I think that is the question because it is silent. Are those individuals, they're eligible, but how would they file? How would the commissioner?
I thought somewhere in testimony they said they didn't intend to file.
Yeah, anyway, I'm happy to do this or to keep it a little more restrictive and say you have to file, but whatever you.
That's fine. I mean, you'd have to file a regular tax form. Why don't we just take it out and be silent like the House, which would apply if you want a tax credit, you got to file a tax form. And let the commissioner come in and talk to us. I told him he could come in and do technical concerns, but I didn't want it. Thank you. Any more advocacy?
I'm not sure having said that. What do you want to do?
Does it make any, I mean, we're saying that an form described by the tax commissioner can say, you just got to file a regular form.
Here's the tax form.
Yeah, all right.
I've never heard.
I was gonna repay the favor.
What are portals? I know. I guess portals are those things I buy online.
So this seems.
I think it's innocuous and he can design it whatever way he wants and not all portals. And he can put on picture, child's school picture or something. All right, let's keep going.
Would you like to leave the subsection D in the language for the next version?
Yeah, let's just leave that.
The next two sections make changes to the child and dependent care tax credit. So there is an existing 24% credit that doesn't have additional income limits other than the federal income limits. That is being repealed in section 2. And in tandem with that, strike out on lines 9 and 10. That is page 3. In section 3, what is currently called the low income child and dependent care credit, there is an expansion of that credit. It's currently 50% of the federal credit with income limits. So it's for $30,000 of AGI for single filers or $40,000 for joint filers. Those income limits are repealed and it's a full credit based on the federal credit. Additionally, as discussed on Friday, these requirements that this services be provided in a certain type of environment are repealed, and it's just following the federal requirements for care that it be provided so that the caretaker who is claiming the dependent is able to work or look for work. So that's it for the child-related credits. The next benefit is the student loan interest deduction. So this is in the taxable income definition, and it adds another exclusion from taxable income for individuals in subdivision 6, which is on line 19. And that exclusion is for the amount of interest, so it's all interest paid by a qualified resident taxpayer during the taxable year on a qualified educational loan for the cost of attendance at an eligible educational institution, and goes on to add 2 new definitions to make it clear what a qualified education loan and eligible educational institution mean. That those follow the federal definitions for the federal student loan deduction, student loan interest deduction, excuse me. And then the qualified resident taxpayer is defined as someone who has residency as defined under the income tax chapter, and it's limited to taxpayers whose AGI is equal or less than $120,000 for single filers and $200,000 of AGI for married filing jointly filers. The next section, section 5, amends the statutory purposes. So tax expenditures are generally all required to have a statutory purpose. So the child and dependent care credit that was 24% of the federal credit, that statutory purpose is repealed. And then there's some amending language to the low income. That language is removed because now the child and dependent care tax credit, that will be a full credit compared to the federal credit, is available to anyone irrespective of income. There are 2 new statutory purposes inserted into statute. So for the child tax credit, the purpose is to provide financial support to families with young children. And for the student loan interest deduction, that was amended following your discussion. The statutory purpose is now to lessen the financial impact of higher education debt on Vermonters. I'll pause there if there are any questions before, if you'd like, I can walk through the retirement income language. I also just want to point out, when I add in sunsets, a lot of this language is going to be repeated for the student loan interest deduction and the child and dependent care credit.
Okay. Manufactured home, I don't think.
Yeah, the Social Security and retirement, we just did that.
That's okay. Okay, because that's just a 5.
It's one with cut and paste.
Yeah.
Yep. So it's a $5,000 increase in the income thresholds. And then it does repeat all of the language from S53 because that language would have been $5,000 less for all the income thresholds. So that's all included. Sorry, I'm trying not to make anyone sick as I scroll. Okay, the affordable housing tax credit is in section 8. So that's an increase of $250,000 annually. This is the language that originally came over from the House last session in H 437. And lastly, the effective, or actually there are 2 more provisions here that have changed from the last version you saw. The effective dates makes, first, the effective date section effective on passage. All of the income tax credits will take effect retroactively on January 1st, 2022. For the sunset provisions, all of those sunsets will take effect January 1st, 2025. So that will give 3 years of those being in effect. And then I had noted an error in the effective date in the last version. The affordable housing tax credit increase was supposed to, and based on H 437, was supposed to apply starting July 1st. So that is now split out there.
Okay.
And then lastly, the title of the bill, you had requested an act relating to tax reductions for Vermont families, just to make sure that the title is accurate. Not all of the tax changes would apply to families. So I took the liberty of changing that to Vermonters.
And is
Okay,
that okay, even if we have the appropriation in there? You're comfortable with that?
how about Ted, yeah,
I'm fine with that.
It's fine. Are you okay with that, Abby, even if it has
That's
appropriations
the
in
kind
it?
of thing we,
Think that that's okay. Let me think about it when I come back with the next draft.
we're gonna add the two pros.
Think that that's still okay.
Mostly tax.
enact related, mostly.
Struggling Vermonters. Okay, we've got to add the two appropriations and the other two retirement reductions. And I guess we've got until tomorrow afternoon. So does that work?
Should we could text Pearson when we're off the floor and sitting here and he can zoom in from wherever he is.
You don't need to worry about me. I'll trace.
We'll have Faith send him a text, and if he wants to zoom in, he can, and if he's in one of those spots where it's out, he won't. Okay,
Chair,
yes.
so hesitant to mention this, and I apologize again for not on the floor, but I don't know if there's any way we can address this issue on the salt tax before the floor tomorrow.
Well, that's what I'm trying to get to.
Okay,
Thank you.
because I mean, Abby's our key person, she's going away.
Oh,
So,
well,
I
she's here
don't know
for,
if
she's
she's
here
here
till
for a
5.
few minutes.
Okay.
And I don't know that we need Abby. I don't,
Polio is who we need, right?
no, Bolio is not coming in and advocating here anymore.
Oh, I thought you wanted to hear from him.
No,
Okay,
he can give technical, but I do not want to hear the governor's plan one more time.
So
I wasn't
tell us how you
talking about
really feel about Chair.
I was talking about salt, not this. Polio.
But it is part of the governor's plan. I have Abby side by side, I assume. That's what this is. Okay. Yep, 1, 2, 3. I'm missing, well, Senator Brock's gone, so we get 2 anyway. Yeah. Nope, only got 3. Thanks. Okay, so that's the side, and this is copies of the bill. Or this is the copies of the amendment.
That is the vote. I mean, that's the whole thing, the amendment for salt.
Sorry. Well, we had decided not to do the amendment on the tax bill, and suddenly it shows up on the economic development bill. And I would say that was mildly upsetting.
And the only thing I can say in defense is I went through my emails, and there were 4 emails.
You did send me an email saying you were going to do it,
No, I know, but last week I sent you 3 others. I was
saying you
told
were going to do it. Right, but that, it is still tax policy, and
Right,
this
no, no,
committee
fine,
still
fine.
needs to be
Fine.
able to give an opinion
Absolutely.
as to whether or not we think it should move forward.
Okay.
All right, so why don't you walk us through, I think we've given Abby enough, why don't you use the side by side and walk us through, because when it was here before, and the tax commissioner's words, it was not ready for prime time. So now we're putting it into law and saying, but if it's not ready for prime time,
The commissioner can certify that to the E-board and to the joint fiscal committee, and it would be delayed at least another year.
so why don't we just wait till it's ready for prime time
Because
and
we-
do it next year?
Because we won't, because we will lose tens and tens of $1 million in tax.
No, we are not losing it.
Businesses are.
No, this primarily hit individuals.
No, it only hits people, or the only people who got hit with the cap are, well, the people that you could do a workaround for is S
Yes.
corporations, LLCs, and
Yes.
partnerships.
Yes, but those are not the only ones that were hit. All working professionals that owe more than $10,000. So all those people that are not working for pass-throughs are still going to have to pay. This only helps a certain number of upper income individuals. And we're rushing it. The feds may well correct it. The tax commissioner was very concerned about how much work it would take his department to do it when he was in here. And he said it wasn't ready for prime time and it needed more work. And suddenly the tax commissioner thinks it's good. So I'm just having some disconnect issues.
I think the reason why he thinks it's good is because he has these two off ramps in case it turns out not to be good.
My recollection from when we talked about this was that what you said about the commissioner's concerns, and also that it just seems kind of like a tax scam to get tax breaks for wealthier people. And it wasn't,
Tax what?
scam, like there's a way to like.
Well, it's not a tax break. It would allow, federal law now doesn't allow people to deduct more than $10,000 in state and local taxes. Anybody. Given what I just paid out this week in the tax bill that's coming from Montpelier, I'm at that limit. So people with nice homes are at that limit. You know, I don't have a McMansion and my property taxes are over $8,000.
I know, but the way to make this work is through creating these pass-through entities and.
No, they're there. That's what I thought. We were gonna create a state pass-through. And it's not, and Graham, correct me if my memory is wrong. This is if you are an owner of a pass-through, not an employee. If you, at a lot, you know, if you're an owner, so you are part of a partnership.
That's correct. For the record, Graham Campbell, this is available for individuals with pass-through income. So you can be a full owner of a business, or you can be a 5% shareholder of a pass-through business. So long as you have some amount of ownership in a business, you would be able to use this workaround.
And somehow you would pay your taxes to the business, you would get a credit which you could give to the state, but there was no true up available yet. We weren't sure if it was how it would impact the state.
Yeah, I mean, generally the way these workarounds work, not speaking specifically to this bill, but basically if you think of a business, it has sometimes one or many shareholders, and the shareholders would be responsible for deciding whether they would want to pay the state tax at an entity level, or whether they would all just essentially do as they do now, which is take the profits from the business and the net income, divvy it up amongst the shareholders, and then pay it on their personal income tax. What this entity tax allows individuals to do is to pay their pass-through business, pay the entity tax on their pass-through income, which allows them to fully deduct their state and local taxes on their federal tax return. So they're no longer limited by the cap. And so this entity tax, the way it works is the entity pays the tax, and then the state gives the individuals who paid on the entity tax a refundable tax credit equal to or close to the amount that they paid in entity tax, so that their state income tax, state personal income tax, goes down a lot, but they are paying through the entity tax now on their pass-through income.
Senator Peterson.
This is confusing, but are you saying that effectively now the entity pays tax what they didn't before. And then that allows that tax to show up in the federal tax code as a business expense that is deductible where it didn't. Is that basically what we're talking about?
More or less, yes. Yeah.
And then this is a trick to have the state tax code say, we're not actually after more revenue. We're just going to let you take advantage of this, and then we're going to make sure that the state revenue is pretty much equivalent to what it would have been last year.
That's exactly correct. And so not compared to last year, but compared to what it would have been if you would just pay for it. And so that's in this proposal, that's sort of the JFO tax department working together to figure out whether the bill as drafted would generate or reduce state revenues, because the effect on state revenues at this point in time, at least to JFO, and I think I speak, Craig Bolio said so, that it's somewhat ambiguous whether it would be up or down. And so for any individual taxpayer, the impact of the entity tax may increase their state taxes, but reduce their federal taxes. So they end up being a winner in this overall. But if we're just thinking about state revenues, you know, for an individual, it really depends upon whether their entity tax is greater than their personal income tax or not.
So their tax preparer will say, here's your strategy. Turns out you're paying more to the state, but it's going to save you twice that to the feds.
And no individual taxpayer would be hurt because they would go to their account.
Yeah, because they're going to.
Why win here?
The question is,
I just want to say that, yes, it does not apply to individuals because we can't do that. I mean, if I could do that, I'd like to do that, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't help the business community.
Well, this are people that own a part of a business. They're essentially stockholders, only they are unlike a corporation where the risk doesn't flow through to them. The risk does flow through. We're going to allow them to deduct their state and local taxes. For all those professionals that are out there working for wages, they're not going to get the deduction, and there's an equity issue there.
Yeah, I think most people are not S corporation owners.
So, I mean, I admit that. I mean, and as Senator Brock said over and over again, just because everybody can't take advantage of what the federal IRS is now allow for lower taxes for Vermonters, we're going to say no to the people that can.
Just full disclosure of MS corporation.
Me too.
I was in this corporate, no, I was at PLC.
I'm just a
I'm just a regular person.
No pension, no corporations.
So as my reward is I pay a minimum of $250 a year for being an S, and I don't have any income from it, but for full disclosure, I'm an S.
You're an ass, is that full disclosure?
Oh!
Oh,
I heard that wrong with my hearing aid.
I've only achieved
Oh my
complete
God.
S in the most years.
This is, we have 15 more minutes.
Yes.
Could I just ask? I don't pretend to understand all this. If there's no impact on the state, then it is hard to argue why we wouldn't do it. But I've never seen something come into law with as intense a condition as this, there where we're saying, we're passing this law, but we're inviting the commissioner to figure this out and come back at a date certain. And I'm just curious for Graham or Abby or Catherine, if that is concerning, or if there are parallels where we've done that would comfort me a little bit.
And is this delegation? So we're saying that we'll do this if we're allowing the commissioner to decide if this tax or tax break or whatever moves forward.
So I'd be happy to pipe in there. There's the needle is really threaded very carefully in this language. It is possible, there are, and I haven't done a deep dive into this, but I can resurrect some other legal work that's been done in our office on different court cases that have looked at contingency and contingent effective dates and the constitutionality of those, because the general concern is about vagueness or ambiguity. So there have been contingent effective dates in legislation that delegate the authority to an executive branch or administration official to determine that something has happened, which is a trigger for the new language, the statute or whatever is in the bill to take effect. This language does sort of have a catch-all default. So first, it has the consensus estimate to determine whether the language as proposed would be revenue neutral or at least positive. And then it has an additional discretion given to the commissioner to determine whether or not implementing the new tax structure and credit structure would be administratively burdensome. And upon making the commissioner's recommendation that if it's favorable, then the tax will take effect and the credit structure will take effect for tax year 22. And that recommendation is required by the end of July of this year. If no recommendation is made, or if the recommendation is not favorable, then the tax will still, and the credit, sorry, it's a whole structure, will take effect January 1st of 2023. So there's still a certainty provided, so there's no sort of gap if either no action were taken or the discretion were exercised differently.
So what happens if it's determined that it's a cost to the state revenue, so therefore it's not going to take effect for 22? What happens in 23 at that point?
At that point, it will take effect as drafted, but that buffer of that year does allow for any further legislative action next session.
What happens if the feds make a change?
So currently the deduction cap is through the end of tax year 25. After that, in theory, it will expire because it was just a suspension of the full deduction. If the feds took action, then that would become something that the legislature would want to look at in linking up next session.
Normally, we would do this work beforehand, and the commissioner would have to come in and tell us what would make it administratively burdensome or not. This is leaving that discretion in the hands of the commissioner. He can decide if he wants to do it or not and just say, well, it'd be too burdensome and stop it, which is, I've never done one like that, so.
Yeah, I'm not comfortable with this construct. First, it does leave a lot in the hands of several committees, the E-Board and JF, the Joint Fiscal Committee. And then it leaves it up to the commissioner after they do their work. And then it goes into effect anyway for the next tax year, regardless of all that work. And we've had a number of bills in this committee that have much, much smaller impact on things. I'm thinking of the bill about Medicaid supplement programs or whatever, that we took out the thing because the committee was not comfortable with a sort of foregone conclusion. And this is a foregone conclusion on a much bigger thing. And I'm not comfortable with this construct. I think it sets up a really bad precedent for tax policy.
So my response is some of the charts we've seen showed the amount of the tax deductors claiming when there was no cap. And it was over $1 billion more in tax deductions than after the law changed. So we're disallowing $1 billion of tax deductions to our businesses, to our S corporations and things like that. The effective date going into 23 was put in there to give legal certainty, but we're back in next year if for some reason there's a reason not to allow it to.
Well, then we do a report back on
But you're
January
losing
15th.
all this money to our constituents
We've
during this
taken
year.
no testimony on this, Michael. The only person we've had in on it is the commissioner, and the commissioner said he wasn't comfortable with it.
But-
That is the only testimony we've had, and you're trying to stuff it into a bill that's not even a finance bill.
Okay,
So-
let Senator Pearson speak.
Well, so what about if we just did your construct for 22 and eliminate, I mean, it's a little weird so the federal construct has a lifetime of the next 3 years. So I'm hearing you say, or 4 years, and you're saying, let's not waste another year.
Correct.
But it's a little weird to condition this first year on criteria that I think we would all agree we need before we enact this. Like, is it gonna cost us money? And then to have a default in. So what if we just did this for basically 1 year? Then, as we've said in a lot of this stuff, if it's successful, if the commissioner meets those triggers, then that will indicate that we're not losing money. And it'll be pretty easy to do it in miscellaneous tax next year. I mean, that seems a little less torture to me.
That's fine. I thought we got a little bit of advice from Abby that by having it kick in the following year, that there's more certainty. But that's exactly what I'm trying to achieve. If it can work this year, do it this year. If it's not, then we're back and we can do it with further review.
I mean, there are scenarios where it's actually makes us money, right? Because that calculation is that it's worth paying more to the state in order to get.
There could be more taxes. to
And
the
it could
state.
be less, that's,
Well,
Yeah.
but that's the condition.
Yeah.
The
who determines that?
big holdup is the modeling.
Who is not an
It's
advisor.
complicated modeling because everybody has different deductions and different property taxes and different incomes. And, that's where I heard the commissioner say, this is really complicated and we need to do the model. We have to reach consensus with JFO. And that's when I said, boy, maybe if we dig a little deeper, and then these off-ramps came to mind that,
Madam Chair, I think the point that you were making was that you have two people sitting at the table and they both earn, $100,000 or 25 now. And through this workabout, in no particular effort or anything else, one of them gets a windfall out of this and the other one gets diddly. And that's the inequity. To the administration's credit, 4 years ago, there was what seemed to be a reasonable attempt to make an adjustment in January and February following that Congress passed the tax cuts in
Oh, yes.
December of 18 to try and not have the inequities amongst Vermonters for that first year and ensuing. This is a windfall for some and zip for others. And, if you could split it, if you could split the difference between the state and the windfall beneficiaries, we would probably take money and shamefully take the money.
I'm with you, but other businesses, you can't do it.
Well, maybe what I thought, Graham, but what I thought when the tax commissioner came in with that, he was going to say is we were going to set up some form of state dummies pass
Like
through.
a general permit for
Yeah,
pass through.
so that everybody could pay their But it turned out that it was just for existing pass-through businesses. I don't know how we help the folks that work for wages. I seem to know more of those. So Graham, can you help us?
Sorry, I just wanted to, some of the, Senator Sorokin has referenced some things that I presented to the committee. I just want to let the committee know that I've posted those or I've asked states to post those about who might impact from this and possible examples to show how it might work. I'm more than happy to walk through some of those things if it helps the committee understand, but I wanted to just let the committee know that I've provided some additional information that may or may not help with this discussion.
Okay, I think we're not going to solve this. And we decided that we weren't going to solve it in the tax bill. Tomorrow, I'm going to have to get up and ask to pass it over again if we're going to keep trying to solve it. Or say we recommend, we have a counter amendment, or we recommend that it's yes or no. And we've got to decide that. I am just personally, we didn't do it because we didn't have the information to know how it would work, and we didn't have the information to know how, what the impact on state revenues might be. And the commissioner seemed fine with that. I actually thought it was fairly embarrassing that no work had been done on it before it was put in as one of the governor's proposals. And it was not one of our more
I'm not
productive
sure that it was
afternoons.
actually part of the governor's tax package. It was an individual bill in the House.
In the House,
I'm
well, the
pretty sure.
tax commissioner was pushing it, so, I think it is really counter to the way we normally do things. Normally, a committee gets the research. There's a lot of things out there. There's a lot of things in health and welfare that we'd like to have done that are getting studied some more because we need some more information before making a final decision. And it would be a really good thing, but to set it up now and say, well, we're going to set it up, and unless the department finds out it won't work, then it's going to be law. That really, to me, is delegating. And I'm not, it's just not the way we're going to do it. And I'm not sure, given all the tax cuts we've done this year, that I'm doing a cost benefit in my head, and I'm not sure that given the income levels we're impacting, this is not a put groceries on the table kind of thing.
Probably not, but there's plenty of people in the $80,000 to $150,000 range that would be affected by this as well. And I just want to say one thing. One of the things, we have numbers on that. Yeah.
Okay.
One of the things that made this of interest to me is I remember back when this whole thing was going through by Trump, all the states, the New England states and the West Coast states, the Democratic states,
Blue states.
the blue states were
That's
really
what I'm
opposed
saying
to it
that.
because they were going to get hit
Yes.
hardest by this limitation on the deduction. So this is a way, I said this on the floor, states are clamoring to do this on behalf of they're doing, since that, I think something like 15 states since a year have passed laws to do what we're suggesting. And it's not only that there are 24 states that have done it, that's 24 states out of like 42, because 8 states don't have any income taxes whatsoever. So everybody's was, they were, so I don't know if it was a surprise, but they were very thankful by the IRS giving the blessing to do this, and they're taking advantage of it.
So the thing is that it's not fair. If you look at the population of Vermont, it's not fair. If it doesn't impact state revenue, then the question is, are there people that we are comfortable saying, we'll help you pay less federal tax as long as state revenue is not impacted. And to me, if I could be comfortable doing that if we set it up on this contingency for the current tax year. I'm sympathetic to the idea that the time window is closing. And it's a good condition. I never would consider this, given who it benefits, if it was a cost to the state. Do I care that it's a cost to the federal government? Not really. And so I don't know if we can get away with that, or if that's a way out of this, to just have it be.
It's also voluntary. You have to elect this, so you have to look at and make sure. No, I think we've heard testimony that it's pretty unlikely that any single taxpayer would lose money in Vermont, because they would make the choice based upon comparing
They
how
have
it's done.
the opportunity, but and I guess the slightly strange contingency is protective of the general fund.
Right.
And so that's the only way I would do it. And that's why I don't like it kicking in next year, no matter what the analysis is.
How many miles did Lincoln walk to return how many cents when there was they failed to give the customer the change back properly? That strikes me as a similar situation on a grand scale, where they gave you the wrong change, and you're gonna take it.
I would be comfortable with doing a study and a report back next session as to whether or not we move ahead. But I'm not comfortable even with that contingency, because there are too many off-session decisions that are made, and I just don't think it's ready for prime time. We don't have the analysis, we haven't had the testimony. So unless it's just a report back from the commissioner on January 15th as to what the analysis is and whether we should move ahead for tax year 20, I'm not supportive of it. But just to lay it out there, you guys can do what you want.
Well, I guess, I think there's sometimes where there's a certain amount of because we dealt with this economic development bill, and we're trying to get money to small businesses and getting grants in
Thank you.
recovery.
Abby has to go, yeah. And we're not gonna, I don't think, we're not gonna have to use Abby to draft anything today. If we do, I'll email it to you tomorrow morning, but Abby definitely can be gone. Senator Bray.
Yes, ma'am.
We are talking about the, putting the salts discussion on 159. We seem to be of two minds. I'm assuming that Senator Brock, since he's a sponsor, likes putting it on. Senator Sorokin likes putting it on. He says we're going to be able to help. It's not really small businesses, it's small business owners, which can be part-time share owners. So this isn't simply your two-person law office.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm sure you're got stuck in not in health and welfare a lot either. It puts it out and it says it will go in next year unless the commissioner finds that the state would lose money, or unless it finds that the state would lose money or would break even, and unless the commissioner finds that it wouldn't be too administratively burdensome.
It would go into effect this year.
It would go into effect this year unless he does that, and if he can't do that, then it would go into effect a year later. It would be put off for a year, so we could intervene.
The only thing I would say is that I think, well, Abby's not here, but maybe Graham knows. I think the way it's worded is it's not just the commissioner's decisions based upon the consensus opinion of JFO and the commissioner.
Okay. Some of us, I think I could say myself and Senator Hardy, this is not normally the way we do legislation. Normally, we would have a report come back that says, this would be the impact on state revenue, this is what it would take to set it up. And when the commissioner was in here, I remember him saying he wasn't comfortable that it was ready for prime time. It's delegating more authority than, at least in my opinion, than we usually do. The argument is, well, if we can get money out there to some of those folks, then we might as well let them deduct it from their federal taxes if we can. The people that get left out are the folks that are working for wages, don't own a partnership, and they won't be able to deduct theirs. So we're right now, everybody's paying, but we are creating an inequity.
And what's the revenue impact for the state or? it's-
We don't
Only
It can't be any negative. It won't go into effect if there's a negative effect.
It won't go into effect this year, but it would automatically go into effect next
Yeah,
year.
and Senator,
We don't know what it is.
Senator Pearson came up with a solution to get rid of the automatic impact in 23 if it doesn't go into effect, which is fine. We just put it in because we thought that next year we would intervene if there was a problem. And legislative council said it'd be better to do it that way for delegation purposes. But that solution, if that makes a difference, that's not a problem. And I just want to say, we didn't pass this out of our committee over any kind of objection from the commissioner. The commissioner worked with us and helped us draft the language that he felt comfortable with. Now,
He seems to have done a change since he was in here.
he didn't have these off-ramps.
Okay, so the off-ramp he gets is, if he decides he doesn't want to do it because it's too much of a burden, he doesn't do it. And that was his prime concern here. He thought it would be administratively too burdensome for him,
Or it will lose its money.
or it would lose us money.
So we send
Too
it,
unseemly.
we ask them to enact something, but we let them decide whether or not to go ahead.
Yes,
So
and the off session when we're not around.
In consensus with the joint fiscal.
The only consensus with JFO is on the revenue estimates. It has to be a consensus revenue estimate. If they say it's a positive, then the commissioner, or a negative impact, he can't go for it. If it's a positive impact, he could go for it, but he doesn't have to go for it. Still leaves the
If he
decision about to
thinks
go
it's too burdensome.
for it with the commissioner, yeah. he thinks
Now, we
it's-
would wait another year, but we could, I mean, we're gonna get up and, well, we can draft a substitute, I guess, amendment. We could get up and ask that study come back. You know, that the commissioner report back to, and if we wanna move it along, JFO, but JFO's got a pretty limited range. It got really stretched during COVID because we get to approve grants to the state, and all the COVID money happened to be a grant. And we get to authorize moving some money around. It's a limited percentage to meet emergencies. And the governor has some limited amount. But that's pretty much it. So to make decisions about whether or not tax policy should go forward.
That is the essential purpose of the General Assembly, is the power of the purse.
Yeah.
And we are just giving that away to the tax commissioner. And in this case, without full information, and I'm not comfortable with that.
Senator Bray, we'll listen to you now because we've been talking for a while.
louder mouth. Well, so from hearing it from outside, I don't, unless there was some urgency to it. I mean, I could see
There is a little bit, right?
if there were urgency, then I'd say, oh, maybe we want to get this done and so that. But if it's just, I should say just, if it's for the purposes of providing tax relief to a certain category of individual who can make, take advantage of this workaround, then it doesn't feel like an emergency to me. And I would rather stick to the normal legislative process of us vetting it and moving it on a regular schedule.
Okay, I would make the argument that there is urgency in the sense that the lowest figure that we've heard in terms of the range of savings to these businesses is $40 million to $50 million in tax savings.
Okay.
When the commissioner came in, the first thing he said was, this is the closest thing to free money you're gonna see. And because he wasn't ready at that point, I explored further, is there any way we can get you ready?
It's not to businesses, it's to individuals.
Well, it's individuals who
It's
have.
to people
these
who have an LLC
pass-through-
or.
It's called a
pass-
pass-through.
LLCs and S corps.
LLC. But it comes back to those individuals who have an ownership interest in the city. And from where I sit in economic development, we were struggling really hard to help businesses as well as individuals in our bill. And the governor has just been out there totally blasting us already. And here's something that I think we can do this year and not lose the opportunity of that kind of money.
For me, it's like late innings, and so it makes me a little concerned about
Could I just,
this moment. I know that late innings, though, a lot of work gets done, so it's not like I said against it, but
could I just ask you or Graham a question, Senator Rockin? You said something about 2025. Is there, I thought that spoke to the urgency, so.
Well, it's an extra year that we lose. If the thing doesn't get renewed, it's scheduled to sunset at the end of 2025.
At the federal level.
At the federal level. Well, that's where the problem is.
Right, but these business, if you want to call it an emergency, these businesses, it's individuals who are partners in the business, it's their personal income. They have not been able to take this deduction for 4 or 5 years, right? So, and they haven't gone under. Some of them got PPP grants and a lot of other things, which was over the objection of joint fiscal. And so they've been getting stuff. They have, it would be nice, but this is a federal problem. This is, the feds said, you can't deduct this anymore. And the feds can undo it. We can do a workaround, which will help some of them, but not others. And if this has been going on for 4 or 5 years, I don't think anything terrible is going to happen if we go through the normal
I agree.
process.
Nothing terrible is going to happen, but it's an incredible lost opportunity. And just because if the legislature ends on this date, if there's a way to keep that alive, that's what we're trying to achieve and take advantage of a golden
We'll
opportunity.
probably be back for a veto session if the commissioner can get his study done by then. We could do it then.
Can I ask Graham a question?
Sure.
Graham, the 2025 date is when the federal tax policy that disallows the SALT deduction expires. Is that right? I don't know if I said that right, but do you know what I mean? What happens?
Yes, that's correct. So, but it's at 2025 for the state and local tax deduction, but it's everything on the personal income tax side that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act put into place. So it's not just that provision, it's everything else. Everything from the rate changes to the personal exemption to the child tax credit to the pass-through deduction. There was numerous things on the personal income tax side, and all of those sunset in 2025, not just that.
So 2025 is going to be a busy year in this room.
We may be rewriting the tax code again, depending on what they do.
But even if it was just this one thing, then after 2025, people would be able to, assuming this expires, people would be able to again deduct their state and local taxes.
That's correct, but again, it's the entire personal income tax changes. So in reality, even though people who will be able to now deduct their state and local taxes, there's a very good chance that if the federal government doesn't do anything in 2025, then those people, even though they'll be able to deduct state and local taxes, will still receive a tax increase as a result of the repeal of all those items, because the entire package, you know, for these groups, particularly for pass-through businesses, generated a lot of tax cuts for that group. So basically, individuals be able to deduct their state and local taxes, but that benefit would likely be offset by things like the loss of the child tax credit, the increases of the rates that would go back up. And so if this committee will recall, back in 2018, it was shown that Vermonters would save a lot of money on their federal taxes as a result of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So once that repeals, then you're likely to see a tax increase, even though individuals will be able to deduct their state and local taxes.
Right, so you just said a really important thing, Graham, which is that the federal tax cuts that happened already benefited this very same population that we're trying to help. We just said they received a huge federal tax decrease.
So is that a reason not to lower their taxes?
It's a
further?
reason
There's
to
no
say that
impact
this
on-
is not an emergency, that we would go and do a totally different process in order to enact tax policy for this group. This is we don't have enough information to make this decision right now.
Well, okay, we have taken a testimony from the commissioner. It seems like the only concerns that he has primarily is the model.
No, it's got nothing to do with the commissioner and his concerns. It has to do with the responsibility of the legislature to enact taxes and not to delegate that decision to a commissioner who can decide, based on whether or not the governor will let him hire another person, whether or not it's too burdensome to enact a tax package. And it's the delegation, and you might do that in an emergency. We did a lot of stuff like that in COVID. But this isn't an emergency. And I can remember being told, there were people, I can remember when we did the code, but the big winners were people who own businesses, because there were a lot of things that could get passed through or written off, or and it just doesn't feel like the kind of crisis that you would want to start setting the precedent of delegating to joint fiscal or the tax commissioner to make decisions that rightly belong with the legislature. I think that's the problem. All this money has just got us going crazy. I've said I'm going back to equestrian school and find out how you get the bit out of the horse's teeth once they've got hold of it.
You stuff your finger on the side of their mouth, and there's a spot right here. I know, I've done it.
Make them open their mouths, yeah.
Open their mouths.
They have the bid and they're running, then you don't do that.
That's right. You just hold on for dear life, been there.
I guess-
Okay, Senator Britt.
So that reason you last articulated, for me, it's enough not to do it, to stick to maintaining our legislative authority over revenues. The other thing too is, and it's not an emergency, so that's another thing. And then the judgment it's a subjective judgment. What is quote unquote too burdensome? So it's not even pinned on something quantitative that happens. So you can say, well, we don't know yet, so we're willing to pivot based on that. So that to me also, it just pushes it even further into a realm of letting others judge for the state what tax policy we would want to see enacted.
I think the burdensome question is one of, can you pull it off in time for tax year 2022? And so it's fairly unique. It's not a wild application of oversight. To me, the important question is this going to cost revenue or not? That's, to me, it's a yes or no, very simple in my mind. And that's what is in the construct. If it's going to cost us revenue, we're not doing it. If it's not going to cost us revenue, The question then becomes, how quickly are we gonna do it? And the criteria in the amendment is if you can pull it off. I mean, I'm gonna assume this governor's tax administration is pretty interested in giving these kinds of people a tax break. So I don't think it's a big mystery on the burdensome thing. But at any rate, we have an amendment on the floor that's gonna move tomorrow, and seems like, I mean, you know,
Well,
we have to be
I'm
able
gonna
to
stand
say.
up and say what this committee would recommend. Senator McDonald.
More medieval or less medieval, Senator McDonald?
Can we do the thumbs up, thumbs down?
It's just sort of an unethical, something falling over the back of the truck and saying, I'm gonna take it home. Were you in this committee when were you in the committee when Jerry Morris came in here?
Jerry Morris rented a seat in here for some time.
They tell Jerry Morris story.
You
We've had-
don't know Jerry.
No, Jerry Morris was a good lobbyist. He still, but this
Yeah,
is not about.
It's a pretty dirty pool against me, I understand, but.
Rest my case. When Act 60 passed, it changed the taxes all over the place. And there was an error in Vermont tax law. And Vermont Yankee was absolved of $4 million of taxes or something to that effect. And we were trying to correct it, or we did correct it, and they were objecting because there. And Jerry Morris came in with Vermont Yankee to persuade us to give them the $4 million as a result of this error that they weren't supposed to get it, but the law was going to give it to them. And 3 days before that, there was a father and a 13-year-old girl that left Sugarbush, and they were coming into Montpelier, and they got out on Route 100, and there's a canvas bag lying on the road. And they stopped and they picked up the canvas bag, and it said such and such bank in Montpelier. So they put it in the car, and on the way to Montpelier, they went to the bank and they turned the bag in, and the bag had like $3,000 in it.
More than that,
Pardon?
probably a lot more than
Yeah,
that.
it had a lot, and the bank said, well, why didn't you keep it? I said, well, I have my daughter in the car, I'm trying to teach her to, set that kind of example for your children.
Yeah.
So I got a copy of the newspaper article and made a bunch of copies, and Jerry Morris comes in and make their whole pitch. And I passed that newspaper article. And said I called the guy over at War about what was going on. Did he mind if I passed out the article? Jerry,
Story.
he asked for a recess and took the Yankee people out of the hall, and he never came back.
Okay, but Senator.
It's another story about the chair.
I think the question is, are you going to support the amendment on the floor or not?
I'm gonna copy a newspaper article of the.
No, Mark, not yet. You can't come out of your responsibility either.
Well, I can't. Well, am I an amateur or am I a professional amateur?
Can I just say one last thing? I will put my credentials up against anybody in helping progressive policies for workers and low-income people. I just think that there's an opportunity facing us right now. And the only real issue is whether it costs the state dollars or not. And we just don't know the answer right now. We'll know it in 2 months, but we don't know it right now. So that's why it's drafted the way it is, to continue to take advantage of that opportunity. And you also hear, if Randy was here, you'd hear things like, well, we give so many things to so many people, and there are people who are on the edge who get nothing because they're over the cliff. Here's an opportunity, doesn't cost us anything, and we can help people. I mean, going to a small business person in my town and telling them, well, we had a chance to save you $10,000 in federal taxes, but we didn't seize that opportunity, just seems, I just want to be more flexible. And I realize the process is not great, but sometimes formality of process is not the only thing we need to look at.
Senator, yes or no?
I'm gonna say no, but I wouldn't mind anybody that said yes.
No means that you think we should not do this now. I think we can make a commitment and we can have the commissioner in and tell him if he can get his act together and bring something to us, we can get it out of here. I'm sitting on the miscellaneous tax bill right now. Or tell him if he can bring us.
I just don't think there's a need to rush. These people got tax breaks and it's only certain people and they're all high income. And I just don't see what the urgency is.
And we don't know how many PP, whatever loans and COVID grants a lot of these businesses got. I know there were a lot of law firms and accounting firms on those lists that got grants.
Yeah, and it's the individuals, and if you look at the income brackets, they're high income people who own businesses.
What I will say is that the committee was very split. This was a painful decision. We would like it, but that the process, it just, to the majority of the committee, and it was a one-person majority, the urgency didn't seem worth the giving up or the delegating of legislative responsibility to enact tax policy, having gotten all the basic information, and we don't have the basic information.
So
We don't-
I understand what the vote is, and
Yeah.
obviously you're gonna say that. I'll just
And-
say one thing. My mistake, I think, here was, even though I wrote 4 emails that I copied you on of the progress of this, I didn't come to you and say, despite what finance did, I'm very interested in this from an economic development committee. I thought that was evident from what I was doing, and we did take all this testimony there. It's not the
Right.
finance committee, I understand, but it's not like this, there hasn't been some due diligence on this.
No, but it is tax policy.
I understand.
Mike, you did good. You did good work.
And you may win on the floor. This is just, what is the best, how do we deal with taxes and the policy? And I don't know that, I'm pretty sure, as the chair who ran it the last 2 years, that the finance joint fiscal doesn't want to be making tax policy decisions. That's not really what we're set up to do. And
In fact, there was a lot of complaints in COVID that we sort of had like a star chamber, making all sorts of
Yes.
chambers on behalf of the
Yeah.
Senate. And
we tried to put everything we could through the budgeting process for just that reason. And worked really hard to let everyone know, so it's just that, if people can go home, have a good vacation, what show are you gonna see?
I have to get on a Zoom call right now for South